You can make a great film with just about anything, just like you could make a great work of art with some Crayola crayons, right? It doesn't really matter. It matters what you do with the tools that you have. And that's how you can create something interesting. So what we want to do when we are limited to just a little phone like this, and we want to make a documentary, we want to think about what are some advantages that we might get out of a small device like this? What are some disadvantages? And then how can we work with those to make the best film possible? So there's a few things I'm going to cover this evening in this workshop. The first one is going to be audio. The audio situation that you're going to confront, whether you're shooting with a camera like this or a big camera, you're going to confront similar situations, but there's other things we're going to want to think about when we're shooting on our iPhone. The next thing we're going to talk about is our actual composition. So that includes the shot composition, stability, stabilizing our image, and finally lighting, how to create a good lighting setup. And that can mean lighting. We'll get into that. Usually if we're shooting on our phone, we might be shooting on the go, we might be on the fly, we might be lucky, we might be somewhere where we have a more controlled environment, but I'll kind of talk about how we can take advantage of available light to create a nice image on our phone. And finally, we'll close up. I'll talk a little bit about shooting B-roll and give you some B-roll tips. And now these B-roll tips are going to be pretty much the same, whether you are on a phone or shooting on a really nice DSLR camera. So whichever you're into, stay tuned for that at the end because that will be useful for you. Now, the first thing I like to do when I start this kind of workshop, usually when I'm working with students, I love to have them go out and actually film a little bit with a DSLR and a little bit with a camera and come back and sort of see what differences there are. But obviously we can't do that. So I want to talk to you a little bit about what are the advantages that a small camera like this can have over a big DSLR and some of the disadvantages. So right off the bat, just something to think about is that the size of this being this small is a huge advantage to you as a filmmaker. No one's going to give you a hard time about where you're filming. The fact that you're doing an interview in City Hall, if you show up with 3 lights, a camera, and a tripod, someone's going to ask questions. I think in New York City, there's kind of like an unwritten rule where once you have a tripod, that's when the police show up and start asking you for a permit. So having this little camera can get you in places to make your film that normally you wouldn't be able to. There's also a lot of advantages of a camera that is this small because it has really good facial tracking. Most cameras like this have really good facial tracking. You are able to put this camera in places you normally wouldn't. So I could place this camera to create really interesting B-roll because I can get this all the way onto the ground, right? So I can start getting very creative with my angles. It's so easy to move your cell phone around and create really interesting images. We don't want to make movies like this. We don't shoot movies, everything at eye level. This is how everyone sees the world. That's not what we want to do. You want to be creative and think about unique ways to make your B-roll stand out, make people interested in what you're filming. And a camera like this is so easy. If I'm shooting on a big DSLR camera that's on like maybe a gimbal or a Steadicam to get some really awesome shot, it's going to take a long time to get that shot right, to get the focus right, to get my camera move perfectly smooth. But with something this small and this light, I could get the same shot right there, right? So there's a lot that you can do with a camera. So don't be like, oh man, I don't have an awesome DSLR. How am I going to make a really good documentary? You can do it with this, and there's a lot of advantages. So the first thing, let's get to it. We're going to talk about audio. Audio is probably the most important element when you are making a documentary. So whether you are shooting on a professional camera or on a cell phone, you still have to worry about this one major thing, which is audio. And funny enough, it's usually the thing that's the last element people think about when they're making a film. Many times the person in charge of audio is like a production assistant, like, hey, can you grab this boom pole and do this? But it's the most important job. We think about the camera operator and the cinematographer and the lighting when we think about a movie, but really the audio is so important. And the audio is so important because with a documentary, even if your visuals aren't that good, if you're out in the field and the footage you get wasn't exactly what you thought it was going to be, I've had students who filmed at the wrong frame rate or were in the wrong aspect ratio. They were shooting in a really low aspect ratio, so a lower resolution than they thought. They had a 4K camera, but they shot in 720, so it's like this big of a picture. Or they just got back and the footage was overexposed, or it was really shaky, and you're like, oh my God, I can't use this. If the audio is good, we can use the audio. So if you shoot an interview, for example, and the interview doesn't look that good, but the audio sounds good, you can use that to your advantage, right? You can basically say, hey, I'm going to find some photos. I can find some stock footage. I'm going to go out and shoot some fresh B-roll to put over the interview, so the footage doesn't matter because we can always cover it up. But the audio, what you actually captured that person saying, that person you worked really, really hard to get an interview with, what you capture them saying is so important. That's what matters the most. So when we're shooting, especially on our phones, the first thing we want to do is think about audio. The first thing you do when you enter a space is you should stop, listen, and then look. So that means you enter a space and you might be there with your 5 friends and you're filming, have everyone be quiet and just listen. And as you start hearing different sounds, start looking around. Where are things coming from? Is there a window open where you're hearing some noise from the street? Is a humming that you're hearing coming from a fan or an air conditioning unit? You want to start noticing this. And what you'll find is that in just about any space, if you sit and you're quiet, you're going to start noticing the noise of that room. Everywhere you go is going to have some noise. The question is it going to be something that's disruptive to your movie? You don't want to have really bad noise disrupting a really good interview. And I had that happen. Probably the number one thing that ruins a really good interview someone shoots, it's that really bad disruptive noise. And of course, when we're shooting on our camera, one of our disadvantages is that in most cases, unless you are lucky enough to have a microphone that plugs into your camera and hooks up, so it's called a lapel mic, and they do make them that will hook onto your shirt and can connect right into your phone. But if you don't have something like that, and you could get one, like $30, so maybe that's something you look into. But I even got one and it didn't work on my phone. So, be careful. I'll make sure you get the right thing. But, if you don't have that, these phones are still really good. If you're close to someone, they're very directional and you'll still pick up great audio. I mean, we know this from social media, right? Most people are filming stuff on social media about this far away and the audio is clean and it's crisp and it's fine. So the audio is very directional and they're designed to pick up audio of someone speaking right at the phone like this. So that's fine, but just make sure there isn't a lot of interference. So the first things I do when I get into a space and I stop, I listen, and I start looking around, is I think, can I eliminate the issue? So frequently that means like an air conditioner or a computer. Those are probably the 2 most common things you'll notice in a room that's creating some kind of hum that you can control immediately. You can turn that computer off, turn the AC off. Now, the second thing is there are many times elements that you cannot control. So sometimes I've been on a shoot where there was air conditioning, but it was like in the building and it was like the whole floor was controlled by this one unit. So we couldn't turn it off. Plus it was a hot day. No one wanted us turning the air conditioning off. And the other one was street noise, right? Street noise. So sometimes you can close a window and that's fine. But if you're outside, for example, filming and you're near a street, you might not be able to eliminate the sound of cars honking and cars passing you by. So the first thing you should think in that situation is, can I move to a different location, right? If I can't turn off that sound, can I go somewhere that's quieter? I've definitely had a situation where I was filming in front of a library doing stand-up. So filming someone standing up, talking to the camera, and the audio was really bad. And so we actually went into the library and I asked the librarian if there was like a quiet space, and we found like a study room and we filmed a little there, and we filmed a little bit downstairs where they had a quiet area that worked for what we were trying to film. So you kind of have to think like that on the fly. Another thing you can do, especially if it's something like street noise, is try and find something to get between you and the street. So I've been near a park before and we said, okay, let's step away. Let's go a little further into the park. We'll get some trees between us and the road, even around the corner. So at least there was like a brick wall between us and the road. So you try and at least identify the sound and do whatever you can to mitigate that. Because again, if your picture's not good, that's okay. We just need to get good audio of our interviews for a documentary. And the final thing is, okay, so you can't move somewhere else and you can't turn the noise off. So what do you do? What can you do to mitigate the noise? Obviously, if it's something like I said about car, noise, maybe it's like you're closing a window. But it can also mean just trying to find things in the room. So I've definitely had a room where we put some blankets down because we're getting some echo, or we threw blankets over something that was really humming to try and reduce the noise. So sometimes you can try and move like that. But really my suggestion is in most cases, it's probably going to be a computer or an air conditioning unit, and just make sure that's turned off. And if a window's open and there's a lot of noise coming out, turn that off. And worst case, I had someone one time sitting next to a radiator and it was like kicking on and kicking off. And we didn't realize it till later. And I was like, wow, if we had just moved this person away from that radiator, that would have helped this interview so much. So that's the basics of audio. The final thing to think about with audio is just echo in a room. If you happen to be in a room that's really big, think like the gym at your school, where you clap and you just hear an echo, that's a good thing to check too. Is like, hey, is there a really bad echo in here? Because maybe go to a smaller room. Smaller rooms, a smaller space can really help, or something with, again, that may have carpeted floors versus a tile floor. So you can do little things like that. Again, it's not the biggest deal in the world, like those small little changes, but definitely be aware if there's something that's a really obvious noise. And that's what the whole idea of stop, listening, and looking around is all about. It's like really paying attention to just a noise that you wouldn't have noticed when you first walked in with all your friends and you're talking and you're chatting, and suddenly you're quiet and you hear that this thing is very disruptive and you're going to have to deal with it. So let's see. So we have echo, we have stop, look, and listen. That's great. The next thing, this is also with audio, is just utilizing the built-in microphone on your camera. My suggestion there is get closer. Proximity is going to help a lot. So think about when you post on social media, you're at about an arm's length distance. These cameras are built for about that distance, right? For the audio to pick up that far. If someone's like 3 times further away, you're on one side of a room and it's the library at school and you're way over here and they're 20 feet over there, the audio is not going to sound as good as if they're, if they were closer. So you're going to want to get a little bit closer to them. It's tough because you might get into someone's personal space a little bit, but that's what we have to do for good sound. And what's great, an advantage of cameras like this, the lens is really wide. So I have this demonstration camera set up here. Let's see if I can turn this on. So this is in a 4:3 aspect ratio. I couldn't fix that. But again, so an interview for something like that, I could be maybe about this close. All right, so you can see how close that is. So if the camera's set up here and someone's holding it, and this is what the interview looks like, that doesn't look too bad. That's not like you get really close to someone's face and you start seeing, there's a lot of stretching that happens, right? There's a lot of warping that happens in the picture. So we get like a good medium distance away. That distance can be really good for an interview, and the audio is going to be fine here. So think about that distance. Like, what's the distance I would use if I was making a selfie video and I was speaking to all my wonderful followers online? How far would I be away? And when you interview someone, think about that same distance for your camera, especially if you don't have a microphone. Okay? I think that makes sense, right? Moving on. I had to write all this down. Yeah. So I have some notes. I want to make sure I got everything to you guys. The last audio element that will come up while you're making a documentary film and using a cell phone to make it is that no matter what you're using to shoot your film, at some point, you're going to have some voiceover in your film. And definitely last year during COVID, I had a lot of students who were trying to finish films. They started, even it was 2019, 2020, they started films in person in school, and then they were finishing the films at home in the spring of 2020. And they didn't have the same equipment that we had at school, right? So they had to record their voiceover, their final voiceover for their phones, for their films on their phone. And there's a few little tips you can do when you record voiceover on a phone. First thing, it's the same rules when we're shooting an interview about stopping and listening and finding a quiet space. Really good is if you have like a walk-in closet at home or a really small contained space where the noise is really muffled. You really want a space where like the audio is dead. I've had students again record voiceover at their computer, like reading the script off their computer, and I could hear underneath the voiceover just this hum the entire time. So if you go into go into your closet, I have my closet at home set up for voiceovers. It's the walls are all padded and it's very small and there's a little light and there's a microphone there, and that dead air really helps record really good audio. So the smaller the room, the better. And then when you speak, don't speak directly into the phone because the audio will pop. Your breath will hit the diaphragm on these microphones on this phone, and it's going to make it pop and it's going to sound really bad. So I always ask students, like, take this away and speak over your phone like that, just holding the phone down here and speak normally. It can be really good to speak slowly, slower than you think you normally would, and create pauses between your speech. So I might say, this is Ben Willis. He is conducting a workshop. So that's what I would do versus when this is Ben Willis, he's conducting a workshop, right? You want to slow down and be clear, because when you're editing it later, it'll be a lot easier to cut things together, remove things, remove noise, remove weird things that you said by accident. You can slice all those things out if you're speaking slowly and you're speaking clearly. And again, have that microphone. So I'm probably, a good rule of thumb is you make a little, you do a little fist and then you spread out your thumb and your pinky, and that's like the distance you want to have from your microphone. That's kind of the rule of thumb in voiceover work. So you can have it here, and just speak over it. Just don't speak directly into it, right? So that's audio. And again, you know, if that was it, if that's all you did is you got good audio for your film and you came to me, it was like the end of the school year, and you're like, I had great audio, I had great interviews, my footage is so bad. I could be like, hey, we can work with that. You know, we can take good audio and fascinating interviews that you had incredible people and they said interesting things and it all sounds good. We can build a movie with that, because we can just find other footage to put over it. But let's try and get you some good footage. So we are now going to move on to getting a good looking interview. And again, there's a few elements we're going to hit here. The first is shot composition. The next is lighting, and then stabilization. So making sure image is stable. These are the three things that we want to keep in mind when we are making a documentary. Again, whether we're shooting on a cell phone or on a big, awesome camera. So what I want to talk to you first about is when we're shooting on our phone. There we go. There's my example phone. You want to think about the height and the angle of your camera, right? It's a really good rule of thumb to have your camera at about eye level with your subject. If your camera's high, that could be weird. This could be a weird way to do an interview. Hello. You could have your camera too low. So that usually is what happens, is people have a camera too low below their subject, and it kind of looks like that. Not flattering. So the idea, what you want to do is think, where's my lens? And I want my lens to be on the same level as the person's eyes. So I'm always thinking about that. So if I can get it right at about their eyes, that's the first step. So pay attention to that height, especially with your phone, because it's so easy to just be a little bit low or a little bit high. And you can see if I'm too low or too high, it kind of ruins it. But if I can get this shot just at about eye level, it starts to look a little more professional. So that's the first thing. Put that down so you can look at my wonderful flowers. Here, there we go. So the height and angle. The next thing we think about is negative space. So when we think about negative and positive space, think about me, I'm the positive space, and anything in this frame that I am not is negative space, right? None of this is helping my film. So what I want to do is think about how I'm going to use that. For something like this, where I'm speaking right into camera, it's nice to be dead center and to be talking right into camera like this. But usually when we do an interview, we want someone looking a little bit off to the side. So an interview setup, it might look like this. So let's have me a little bit here. So now I'm a little bit to one side of the frame, and I'm going to look at my camera, my interviewer, who's going to be just to the side of the camera. So I might be like this. So let's get it about eye level. So I'm like this, and I'm looking a little bit over in this direction. And usually what you do if you're the interviewer, you kind of stand next to your camera. So I might have my camera like right here, and I'll be right next to it, so the person's looking at me, not into the lens. So now I'm a little bit off. So this can be a really nice way of composing a picture, because when you do an interview of someone, you might have a lower third. So a description of who they are might pop up here. So we have them off to one side. For this, it's nice because we're a little bit wide, right? You know, there's a little bit of space. If you're a little bit too tight, that might not look that good. Obviously with a camera on a phone, it might be a little bit different. So if I'm looking at my phone here, let's flip that like that. So if on my phone, I'm about this far away, I can still get a pretty nice composition. Let's see if I can do that on here. It's a little bit confusing too. So, all right, there we go. And I am about that far away. So I can still get kind of the same framing. Obviously this is in 4:3, so you'd be a little bit wider. But again, it's about having your person a little bit to one side and kind of looking a little bit across the frame at the interviewer, not looking into the lens. You can do interviews that way. There definitely are films. I mean, it's a style, right? You could have your movie with someone looking right into camera like this. That could be fine. The only thing I would suggest is that just make sure that you're consistent, right? So you could, I said that thing about you could make great art with Crayolas. You could make a great film with an iPhone. You can make a great film with a phone if you're consistent, so people know the things you're doing are choices and they're not mistakes. So if I had one interview where someone's centered and one interview where someone's over here and the other interview where someone's looking off like this, there's no consistency there. So to someone watching the film, they just think all these are mistakes. But if every interview is centered or every interview is off to one side like this, then there's consistency. And so that's going to really help your film. So you kind of want to decide on a visual style. Again, my suggestion is go with that sort of rule of thirds thing where someone's over on one part of the screen like so, and looking kind of diagonally across. Again, as we saw with my phone, you probably are going to be a little bit tighter than this. So you might be a little bit closer just for good audio. So it might be an interview more like that. So you might be in a little more of a close-up than a medium shot. That's fine. That's not too bad. So those are the things. So now we've talked about our height and our angle. Our camera's at our eye level, right? We've decided on how we're going to use negative space. We're going to have it to one side. So it's an asymmetrical composition. And then finally, a really important one is our shallow depth of field. So it's important to think about what's going to be behind someone in an interview. So I'll just show you as an example here. Up against the wall. Also, that lighting is terrible. When we do an interview, we really want our subject to have a lot of depth behind them. So as you can see behind me, there's a lot of depth. That really helps your picture look good. It can help the background get a little out of focus, so it's a little bit softer, as we call shallow depth of field. It's that portrait mode where the background is soft and it's out of focus. So the further the background is away from your subject, the more out of focus it is. And what that does is it helps reduce the amount of distractions and things you have to worry about. You really want your audience just to be paying attention to the person who's speaking. So a really good rule of thumb, and this is true on your camera or if you're shooting on a DSLR, is to just find a location where there is a lot more space. So if I was filming inside, I don't put someone up against a wall like I just showed you. I would put them in the middle of the room. If I'm outside, I'm going to find somewhere where there is a lot of space behind them before we get to something, right? So I'm going to try and create a lot of space between my subject and the background. This is really going to help your shots look better, especially on a phone. On a DSLR camera, so if you're using like a real video camera, you can do things like zoom in on it, and that can help. You can use that zoom lens to make your camera, make the background go out of focus. You don't have that option with an iPhone or a Samsung. Like they can zoom, but it's a digital zoom, so it just enlarges the pixels. It looks terrible. You want to keep your image wide in its default setting. So the only way you're going to get that nice kind of background is if you go with a deep composition. All right, so I muted my other camera, and I'm going to, there we go. Okay, so I want to show you what we can do here. So for example, okay, so here's a background. I'm looking for a good background in my house. Okay, so I have an interview with someone and they are right up against this wall. They're up against this wall. It looks like I've cornered them. Help me, oh my God, what's gonna happen? But if I move them away from the wall and I create a little more depth, I can also choose what we see behind them. Now, when I'm interviewing them, it doesn't feel as intense as being up against the wall. So it's probably the biggest mistake someone makes in an interview is they put someone right up against a wall. I see it all the time in student films. Kids are interviewed at school up against some brick wall. It doesn't work. So find something with more space. When you're outside, you have even more space. So the more depth that's behind someone, the better. You don't want to be up against a wall. The next thing, now that while I'm up, I want to talk about lighting. So lighting is a really important aspect. And usually if you don't have a good camera, I mean, if you're shooting on a cell phone, you probably also don't have a big lighting setup. So I can show you this evening, see, I have this, it's called a softbox. So that is what's lighting me right now. And I would guess you're not going to have that. However, there are things we can use instead of a softbox. When I'm doing an interview, I might look for a good light source. So as I walk around this room, I am looking at myself and waiting to see when the light gets good. I'm like, oh, hey, okay, wait, we're getting some good light here. So right here, I am next to a window, okay? So looking for available light like that can be really good. So head on, that could be a little bit bright. It might be nice to have your window to the side of your subject. So my key light is a little bit to the side here. And you can see it's throwing some light on my face. There's a little bit of shadow. I can move here and it becomes more even. But you can play around with that. Windows are really good places for light because they're diffused. So diffused light is when the when our light is being spread over a broad surface versus a direct light. You don't want a direct, harsh light on someone's face. Okay, let's switch back to our other camera here. Hey. All right, there we go. So it's something to think about whenever I am filming in, especially with a cell phone, or if I'm doing a Zoom meeting, I will definitely move around my space a lot. And it's so awesome that with our phones, we can flip the view around, because we can flip the camera around so it's on us, and you can walk around and look until you find a place where you think you look good. And when you find somewhere where you think you look good, probably if you put your interviewer in that your interview subject in that exact spot, they also will look good, right? So it can be really good just to walk around with your camera and start looking for where in your room, where outside, the light and everything looks the best. So when we're not just having someone say, hey, stop right there, and pointing a camera in their face, we're taking some time to walk around and see where the light looks good, where it looks flattering on us, and then we can flip that camera around and film someone else. So those are our things to think about. So we're thinking about our height. Again, just to review, you want your camera at eye level. We want to think about negative space, right? We want to consciously frame all our interviews the same way. So either people are asymmetrical, right? And they're sitting to one side, which is what I advise. You could have people centered, speaking more head on. You can do all kinds of things, but just make sure it's consistent, right? And finally, the depth of field. We want to have a lot of depth behind our interview subjects. Don't interview someone up against a wall. Okay, so we're getting to stability, camera stability. When it comes to our cameras, having a way to stabilize is really going to help your film look professional. And so there's probably a few things that you might have access to that you can use to help you. You probably don't have a tripod, but I know some schools, some people have like an iPad stand. So an iPad on a stand, that's a great way. I mean, that is an excellent camera, and that's a great way to set up an interview. So if you have an iPad on a stand, you can do everything that I just described. But by having your camera on a stand like that, it's going to mean that your camera isn't shaking. And it might not seem bad, a little bit of shake, when you're looking at your phone or a small screen. But when you get to some end of your screen event, and the film might be showing up on a big screen somewhere, or lots of people are watching at home and they have it blown up full screen on their laptops or on their desktop computers, they're going to notice that shake a whole lot more than you expect. So a trick to making your film look really professional is some kind of stability. Don't just be going like this. Okay. So maybe you have a like an iPad stand and you're filming on an iPad. That's really awesome. I have this device. So this is what you might use to mount your phone in your car, right? So we all might have something like this. Now this can help a lot just by giving a little more body to my camera. So there's a little more to work with. It's really hard to take something like this and balance it, right? You're balancing up against a bucket, sliding over. So having something that you can attach to it can help a lot. And as you can see here, like that, well, you can't really see, but basically, all right, that didn't work. But basically I can take this, it has a little flat bottom on mine, depends on what kind you have, and I can actually balance it on a surface and it stays like that. Yeah, let me see if I can. Yeah, I can't demonstrate. You just have to take my word for it. It does balance. I just balanced it. So that can be something. You might have something on here and you might lean your camera against a book, right? You might use a water bottle, a block, something that you find, but you basically want it to be as stable as possible. Now, if it's only you and you have nothing to put it on, maybe you're out in the field, maybe you are doing some man on the street interview and it's election day and you're outside of a voting place and you've cornered some voter and you're interviewing them and there's nothing you can do. My suggestion is take your elbows and you squeeze them into your chest, right? You squeeze your elbows in really tight and then hold your camera like this. Might look a little silly, but this is at least giving me a little bit of stability because I can squeeze my elbows into the sides of my body, and that's going to give me a little more stability than if I'm just going like this, because you're always going to get a lot of movement doing this. So you can squeeze your arms in and do this, or again, find something you can place on your phone. Again, having something like this clipped on here can help you find a little more stability, a little easier, and keep your phone from sliding around. So there are things we can do. And of course, you know, really, if you don't have access to a camera and you, instead of a phone, if you use an iPad, that can be really good because again, it's common for people to have access to iPad stands. And so I know some people do. So you can kind of figure that out. If you don't, phone's still a great way to go. Again, just try and keep it as smooth as possible. The last thing I want to talk about with just composition and framing with our cameras is a little bit about how I'm holding this camera and how I have been holding this camera. You'll notice I'm not holding my camera like this, right? Everything is this way or this way. It's better to keep my lens on the top. Why? Why do I want to do this? Because have you ever seen, say, a clip be shown on TV that someone shot on their cell phone like this? And what happens? There are black bars on either side, and it's this thin, narrow picture, right? We can't use that for a film. We could if your entire movie was like this thin iPhone kind of look, and maybe that's what you're going for. But for the purposes of this particular project and these documentaries, you want to have something that's more traditional, what you might see in the movie theater. And in order to get that kind of a picture, you need to have your phone sideways like this, because that's going to give you the long rectangular picture, which is going to look the best. And it allows you to do great things with composition. Like when I talk about the asymmetrical framing, this kind of framing, which is really nice for an interview, doesn't work at all if I shoot this way, because then it's just going to be me. So you lose that dynamic element of this framing. So what I want you to do is just take a moment just to look at how I'm sitting here before we move on to the next section. This is kind of what we're thinking about when we're framing up a good shot, right? You can see there's a little bit of headroom above me. My eyes are, if we divided this picture into thirds, sort of there's an invisible third line right here. My eyes right at that third line. On your phone, you actually might have something called grid mode, which is really awesome. If you have that feature on your phone and you can turn it on, that can really help. It creates a grid, right? Where there's some horizontal lines and there are two vertical lines. It's that grid divides your camera into thirds. And basically those intersection points where they meet are really good places to put right in the middle of someone's eyes. So I basically would find that line right here and it'd be running right through me like that and right like that. So you can turn on that grid mode and it can help you compose a good picture, because by using the grid mode, there's a little bit of space above me. I'm not dead center. There's some negative space. We can put information here. So that's a really cool, another way that your cell phone can have advantages over a camera, because not all DSLR cameras have like a grid mode built into it like that. But most cell phones have grid mode that you can turn on in your camera settings. I don't know if mine will let me do it with video. I've never tried that, but again, it might be worth taking a look at. And even if it's only available in your photo mode, just experimenting with it and seeing if it works. I'm kind of looking right now to be like, can this do that? So that's something to think about, right? So we've got those different ideas there. The last thing is that I want to come back one more time just to talk about lighting. When we light, we usually are thinking about three different elements. There's usually a key light, which is like that big light I showed you, that big soft box that's over me, that's the key light. Then there's a fill light. So usually that's a light that softens shadows, which you don't have to worry about. And then the one that's really cool is a backlight. So you can see on me, there's like a little blue edge here on the side of my face that's coming from the window that's over here. That is kind of, might be a backlight. I wouldn't necessarily purposely put that in, but that little bit of light, a sort of an edge light, can help separate someone from the background. So if you were kind of advanced and you wanted to mess around with a better picture, what you can do is take like a little lamp, or have like, if you had a window, if your backlight's out of the shot and it's behind your subject and it's shining on them, it hits their hair, their shoulders. It can hit here and it creates a little bit of a line, and that can help separate someone from the background. For me today, it's not as big of a deal because I have this black shirt on, the background's white, so I'm kind of standing out a little bit better. But if I had something where someone was blending into the background, or I just wanted to like work on my filmmaking skills, experimenting with a backlight is a really fun thing to do. And again, it's going to work a lot better in places where the lighting is lower and you have to use your own light, but it's definitely something that you can play around with. Again, I've had students do it with like a desk lamp in a place where we had kind of lower lighting. So we had one light right here behind the camera, creating a key light. And then we had another light on that same axis back here out of the shot, and that's shining this way, and it creates a really cool effect. And it's a fun thing if you can figure out how to make it work. You know, I know it's a hard concept to wrap your mind around, but if you can get it to work, it can be a really cool way to bring some creativity into the lighting scheme and the look of your interviews. And again, it's a lot more effective if you're in a spot where there isn't a lot of ambient light coming in. But it's just something to think about if you want to have some fun. It can be really cool to bring in some lights and turn all the lights off in the classroom and let students experiment with how the image looks when different lights are turned on and where the lights are positioned, and just play with that. It can be a really fun activity. And so if you're thinking about something like that, if you want to play around, if you're really into filmmaking, that could be something that could be a fun thing for you to do. But again, for our purposes, if you're just trying to get a good shot with here, find a window. That's my best advice, is like, you want this to look good, find a window. Something to think about is that even though a lot of cameras out there have really high megapixel ratings, right? You'll see like, oh, the new iPhone has a 12 megapixel camera. And then Samsung will go, well, ours has 48 megapixels. And then someone else is like, yeah, well, this one has 100 megapixels. So they keep adding more pixels to the same little sensor, which means your pixels in this camera are very, very small because they're cramming in as many pixels as possible into a very tiny sensor. So what's that mean? When a pixel gets really, really tiny, it needs a lot more light to create a good image. So if you have an awesome camera with really high megapixels and you're like, I really want to have an awesome looking picture on my cell phone, the way you're going to do that is with a lot of light. So that might be, if you have like a 100 megapixel camera, go outside, because the more light you get, the better your picture is going to look, especially when you have a cell phone and your sensor is so small. So it's a big thing to think about, is lighting when you're using a cell phone, especially if it's a very high megapixel camera. You really want to have access to a lot of light. So outdoors can be good. If you shoot outdoors, just be careful of really intense direct sunlight. It can be good to get someone under a shaded tree, just because it's a lot to work with. When you have direct sunlight, it's either blinding in someone's face or it's shining into your camera lens and throwing things off. So a lot of times it's nice to step into the shade and just get a totally decent shot in the shade with a lot of sunlight all around you. So more light, always better. Always going to be better to have more light to utilize. Okay. So we now know all of these details, right? So just to remember, I'm going to actually take my camera. Well, I'm just trying to think. It's getting a little bit dark outside. I wanted to go outside and show this. And it's something that you can try and experiment with, is do your own experiment, maybe after this workshop, maybe on your own, where basically you should take your camera and follow the first step, which is, remember, is to stop, listen, and look. So enter a space and get quiet and listen. Look around, identify the audio sources. Then let's see if you can find somewhere to place your camera that's going to be nice and stable and give you a nice framed shot. And the last thing is then to think about, okay, how is the light looking here? Can I turn, if I'm inside, can I turn some lights on? So for this Zoom right now, I just turned on some more lights in the house. Even though it was still kind of sunny out, I turned on more lights because you know what, it helped. It threw a little more light into the shot. More light like that is always going to help, especially when you're working with a tiny camera lens like that. And so once you've done those things, you're on your way to being able to create a really good looking interview. Again, if it's stop, listen, and looking around, it's so important. If you can get a nice quiet space for your interview and you can get good sound, we can make anything work from there, right? You can find good photos, you can find good video, you can make your film work if you get a good sounding interview. It's the number one thing that messes up a student film, not them not having the most state-of-the-art camera. It's never the camera, okay? It's the audio. So pay attention to the sound. And then worry about your shot. And again, doesn't matter what kind of camera you have, shot composition is the same no matter what kind of camera you're doing. As I said, try this asymmetrical composition like this, where someone is like this and you put your interviewer right on the edge of that camera lens. So a lot of times when I do an interview, it's great if you have two people for this because one person can be the camera operator and hold the camera right on your interviewer's shoulders like that. So if it's like this and I'm looking right over at the person being interviewed, maybe even the camera's a little bit forward, they're looking at me, they're not staring into the camera lens. And that's how you get a composition that looks like this. I'm like, oh yeah, hi, I'm Ben Willis. I'm doing this workshop, blah, 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 great interview. So try and sort of commit this kind of framing to memory because it's going to really help if you get that good framing and you have really good audio and all the lights are on, you're going to have a good shot, right? So the final thing to cover today, we've got great interviews. Okay, so we got great interviews in the can. We can make a movie almost. What's even better to have is some good B-roll, right? Because yeah, let's say we got that really awesome audio and maybe the footage of our interviews wasn't as good as we had hoped. We want to cover it up with great B-roll. And hey, even if your interview looks good, no one wants to watch someone just talk at them on camera like this without some really cool B-roll to cut to. So B-roll is the footage that we cut over our interviews. And what you want to do with B-roll is first, stop filming like this, film like this, stop filming like this, film like this. That's the most important rule, right? So do that, shoot like this. I know it's easy because you hold your camera like that. So you see something happening, you want to run like, oh my God, I got it. This is going to be awesome. Just calm down, flip your camera and get those elbows in, right? We talked about that. Just get a nice shot. You can see me with my fingers. I'm keeping my fingers away because I don't want to get them in my lens. A nice steady shot. That's going to be a lot better. So what we want to do when we film B-roll, a really good tip, and this is true for any kind of camera, is I call it the 10-second rule. The 10-second rule means you pick something to film. You see something, hey, I'm making a documentary about hydroelectric dams and how they've disrupted the environment of all these rivers. First thing I want to do, I get to a great dam and I'm going, oh man, there's a dam, man, there's water, and there's a waterfall, whoa. I can't use this footage because I'm moving the camera around too much. It's just too wobbly. When you're filming there on the actual day, it might not seem that crazy. So what I ask people to do is wait 10 seconds. 10 seconds is a really long time in real life. When you're filming footage, a lot of times I think I got a shot. I think I held it for a long time and I looked down at the footage timer on my camera and I've only been filming for like 3 seconds. So what you want to do, film for 10 seconds. The first thing is before you do any camera move, do 10 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You see, I'm only at a 5 and it already feels like a million years, right? So 10 seconds is a long time. And what you can then do is then do a camera move. And then you'll settle somewhere else and you'll hold for 10 seconds. So every single shot of B-roll you have starts 10 seconds here and then moves and has 10 seconds here. That way, your editor, when you're cutting this together, can decide, I want a still shot here, or I want a still shot here, or I want to have this camera move coming into this shot. And so a lot of times what I'll do is I'll hold for 10 seconds. 1, 2, 10, pan, 1, 2, 3, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and then I'll reverse it. And so it seems like a really boring way to shoot, but you get really usable footage if you shoot that way. It forces you to pick what you're actually taking a shot of instead of trying to film absolutely everything that you're seeing. You're like, hey, I didn't want to get that thing. Film that thing. Then you can move to something else. Film that thing. And then move back. Seems boring. It's really effective. I learned it from this camera operator who worked for ABC News, CBS, Al Jazeera. Really cool guy. He always said, 10-second rule, do your camera move, then reverse it. And what you want to think about a camera move is you want to think about pan, tilt, or dolly. So a pan is side to side. So I'm panning, I'm just turning. A tilt is up, down. So I'm tilting. Or a dolly is where I'm actually pushing in towards something or pulling out towards something. There's also a tracking shot, which would be moving with something. So you might be walking along, someone's walking down the street. You're like, Senator, I have a question for you. You're moving like that. So you want to think about those kind of moves because we're all used to seeing those kinds of camera moves on film, right? In movies that we see. So if you're replicating those kind of moves, it's a lot easier for your audience to digest. If you're filming something and you're just doing whatever, it's a lot harder for people to process that. So you want to think the same rules for an interview. It's like that stability, right? Nice and stable, and you can do these moves. Now, I know I did talk about at the beginning that one of the advantages of a cell phone is you can do really cool things, right? This cell phone, I can get incredibly low. I can place it on the pavement. I can take this cell phone and stick it into this potted plant behind me. I can put it right in there. You can put this camera places that you would not be able to do with an actual camera. You can bring this camera places where it's much less disruptive than if you had a really big shoulder mounted camera. So there are a lot of advantages of having a cell phone. What we want to do is try and compose our shots in a way where people don't even think that this was shot in a cell phone, right? We don't want people to see it and go, oh, it's a cell phone video. Look at that cell phone video, blah, 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 boring. We want people to see this and go, oh, hey, look at that's a professional film. That looks awesome. And not think about what it was shot on. It was shot on a cell phone or not. We want people to not even think about, oh, that's cell phone footage, right? That's our goal. So we're turning it sideways. We're being very stable because think about it. What says something is a cell phone shot? It's vertical and it's like totally shaky. Hey, look at that. Oh my God, what an idiot. Yeah. No, we want to have like this sideways and our moves to be very thoughtful and nice and smooth, nice and slow. Because all of that your editor can use later on. You want to give whoever's editing your project, whether it's you, whether it's someone else, options, right? You want to give them the ability to find ways to use this footage to help make your film stronger. And you don't necessarily know what that's going to be when you're out there filming the B-roll. So you want to try and just give them things where you're not making all these choices for the editor. You're giving the editor options of things that they can do, okay? I would say my last thing is that something that is a lot easier to do on your cell phone than a big camera, and I talked about this at the beginning, is those kind of dolly shots, right? So you can do kind of slow camera moves. And what's so cool about these phones is that they have really good autofocusing and they have touchscreen autofocusing. So you can touch, so you can actually move your camera towards something and be clicking on the thing that you want to keep in focus, right? So you can use your finger and like, think about that. You can also do a really cool one's called a rack focus, where you focus on something in the foreground and then in the background. And with a phone, you can do that by using your touchscreen, right? You can set up your phone really close to something. You can tap on the thing that's close to you and then tap on the thing that's far away. And you get this really awesome rack focus happens. So that's like a cool little tip that'll give you like a really awesome shot, okay? So that was camera moves. Okay, awesome. So I just want to close up, just to review very quickly, things that make the fact that you are shooting your film on a cell phone kind of awesome, okay? First thing, they are small. You can conduct an interview anywhere without someone coming and asking what you're doing, asking for a permit. That's pretty awesome. Two, you can get really cool shots because of the mobility of this camera. Because you can do so much, you can put this so many places, you can move it so smoothly just with your own hands. And you can do this with a tiny lens and this little camera body, which someone with a big fancy camera just wouldn't be able to do. So think about what advantages do I have when I'm shooting with this phone? The next one is you can flip it and use it on yourself as a stand-in. We never want to be trying to get our shot just right with the person we're interviewing there. I never would have like, hey, Ben, stand right there. Okay, hold on. No, it's much better to have a stand-in and you allow your interviewer to go and chill. I mean, the person who's going to be interviewed, go chill, relax somewhere. They don't have to worry about your creative process. So being able to flip this around with a click of a button and frame up a good shot and go, okay, this lighting looks good. I think like that. And you can do that all yourself. Set this up, and then you bring your interview subject in, and then you interview them. And that's awesome. You can do it as like, you don't need a stand-in. You don't need a camera operator. You can do it all yourself. So being able to flip this screen around to see how something looks is a huge advantage. There are, of course, disadvantages. The disadvantages are first audio, in that you're not going to be able to, you might be able to have a mic that you can plug in here, but in most cases you're using the audio that's built in. So you want to be closer to your subject. They need a lot of light. So that's something to think about, right? Shooting in low light is not necessarily going to look really good. Again, you can experiment with that. Like I suggest, like it's cool. Even if you're like filming at home, turn off lights in some room and just like practice turning on different lights and seeing how it looks on you when you just have a few different lights and play around with it. It can be cool to see how your camera does in low light, but in general, you need a lot more light. The other disadvantage is they can't zoom, right? You can do a zoom by using your fingers and doing that move. That's just enlarging the pixels, so it makes the image grainier when you do that. That's called a digital zoom. An optical zoom is where the lenses actually move and they zoom in. That's what like a bigger camera has. So that's a disadvantage. You're not going to be able to do zooms as easily like that with this camera, right? With a phone. But these cameras can be really awesome. There's some things to think about. One is when you shoot, look at the different resolutions. You know, most cameras have a little button that will be in HD or 4K. Some even go higher than that now. Shooting in 4K is a really good idea. I would definitely set my camera to the highest resolution possible. It's still compressed. It'll be easy to edit still because it's on a phone. It compresses it to smaller files, but 4K is going to be higher resolution. So that's cool. You can also look and see if your camera has variable frame rates. So some cameras shoot in slow motion. I shoot a lot of B-roll in slow motion. The reason why I do that is because of exactly what I was talking about before. Remember when I was here and I was counting when you're trying to hold a shot for 10 seconds? 1, 2, 3. A lot of times in the field, that's all the time that you have. And whatever you're trying to film, it's over. It's time to move on to the next thing, right? If I'm filming a burning building, I actually did that before and I was running into the building with firefighters. I was in full turnout gear. I had my camera going at a really high frame rate. I was shooting like 120 frames a second. So I was basically shooting in slow motion so that when I got out of this situation, I could look back and actually find moments that I could shoot, right? So 3 seconds is that fast and it's done. But because I was shooting in slow motion, that 3-second move was now 9 seconds. And that 9-second move is now moving like that. And I'm able to pick out a moment there to use for B-roll. So shooting in slow motion when you're filming B-roll can help, give you more moments. Slow motion can also get rid of some of the jitters. So if your camera's kind of shaky like that and it's in slow motion, it can feel smoother. If I'm doing a camera move like that, I might put that, a dolly. I might do that in slow motion because, again, the slow motion is going to smooth out any little camera shakes. So that's a great little thing that you can use when you're shooting B-roll. Obviously, the one downside there is it messes up the audio because everyone will be talking like this. So you don't want to do it for footage that would be something where you want to be using the audio for, right? So those are some pro tips there. So that's all the things. So again, I think the conclusion I want you to take away from this is if you only have a cell phone, you can make a really good video, okay? So lighting, having a lot of light's really good. Make sure you're not filming your interviews somewhere where there's a lot of like audio interference. There's a lot of noises going on. You want to be somewhere where the audio is really dead. When you record voiceover, don't speak into your phone like that. Hold it a little away from you. Talk over it like that. So those are some, and when you shoot B-roll, hey, try using the slow motion mode when you're shooting in B-roll. That can help you a lot. So those are some tips on how you can make your film a lot better. My one last tip that I'm just thinking of as I sit here is fluorescent lighting. A lot of times when we're filming, especially in like a school or something, there's a lot of overhead fluorescent lights. Turn that off. It like makes the image look, everything just look kind of bland and gray on camera. So it can be really nice in those situations, like kill those lights or move over towards a window. Windows are great sources of nice soft light, especially if it's an overcast day and there's a nice diffused soft light coming through the window. It can look really nice. But the best thing you can do is just get out there and experiment. Start, filming a little more, trying to follow some of these ideas and see what looks good. Trying to be like, hey, can I make my camera, my cell phone footage look as good or start to replicate what I see in the movies and not just try and do like vertical cell phone footage, right? Remember, not this, not this, right? Okay. So that is all the time we have for today. Thank you for joining me. And if you're watching the recording, thank you for watching this recording and good luck on your films. I hope to see you at the next, I'm doing 2 more of these workshops. So thank you.